You're listening to the Mississippi Outdoors Podcast. I'm your host, Matt Wyatt. This podcast is all about squirrel hunting. There's a really good chance there's something here that you didn't already know. We're talking with Scott Baker, longtime biologist here at MDWFP.
This episode of the Mississippi Outdoors Podcast is brought to you by the Foundation for Mississippi Wildlife, Fisheries, Parks, and Marine.
You're listening to the Mississippi Outdoors Podcast. I'm your host, Matt Wyatt. Today, we're talking squirrel hunting with Scott Baker, Scott, welcome to the show. And this building and this place at MDWFP, you're no stranger to here, are you?
No, I'm not. I've spent many a days here.
Yeah, so 26 years you spent as an employee and on the staff here at MDWFP. Recently retired, now you're with the Nature Conservancy. But for 26 years, this was kind of home, wasn't it?
It most definitely was.
In that amount of time, in that 26 years here, like looking back on it, just briefly looking back on it, what was that career like for you here?
It's a dream job. And I think about it as being a dream job, but it's also a dream career. Because you said, I worked here for 26 years and I retired a year ago and went to work for the Nature Conservancy and doing similar type work, just a different employer, staying in the same natural resource field. So it's been a great path for me.
Yeah. All right. So squirrel hunting. How far do we go back for you to the first time you were in the woods on a squirrel hunt? How far does that go back?
It was either the first species I hunted or the second species I hunted. Because my earliest memories of hunting, I can't remember if it might have been squirrel hunting or it could have been deer hunting. Deer numbers were a lot fewer than what they are today, but it would have been one of the two at that time.
Where'd you grow up?
Rankin County.
Okay. So this really is home, kind of where we're sitting.
Yeah, it sure is.
Yeah. What was that like? Was it with a 22? Was it did you hunt with dogs that early in your life?
Not on the first hunts, no. It would have been probably following my brother around without a gun, and watching, just participating in the hunt from a spectator standpoint. And then as I got older and improved me being safe, then I was allowed to carry a gun. But a lot of the early hunts that I did, even though when I started deer hunting, was still small game hunting, squirrel hunting. And hunting with a dog was part of it, but I didn't own a dog. But I always had friends that had dogs. My babysitter's husband had a dog, and we had places to hunt. So we were a pretty good combo. He had the dog, and I had access to the land, so we hunted together.
For people that are listening that are unfamiliar, when they hear, okay, squirrel hunting with a dog, what type of dog, first of all, like generally is involved in being trained for that type of sport?
Matt, that's a good question because it's changed over time.
Okay.
Back when, say, our parents would have been coming up and they hunted with the dog that they had. It wasn't a specific species of dog. The dog that stayed around the yard was a squirrel dog, whatever breed it was, and most time they wasn't a pure breed. They knew to squirrel hunt in the daytime. They could take them out at night and coon hunt. And not to say that like today, feist and curs, mountain curs are very common. They existed back at that time, way back, but they weren't as popular then as they are now. So a small dog would be a feist. You got tree and feist, some different types of feist, and then curs, mountain curs being one of the more popular ones. So a big dog or a small dog.
I wonder, some of those species that are sort of known for it now that you mentioned, the feist, I wonder why those species, like why it developed that's kind of the species that a squirrel hunter sort of keyed in on.
And that's a good question. I've got a feist now, and I call him a critter dog because he'll hunt, anything. Mm-hmm. I think they're just born into it. If there's a grasshopper or a green lizard, he's after it. And I think it's just their innate ability to do that, sense of smell and hunting ability.
Yeah. So you own squirrel dogs now?
I do. I've got a feist. Like I said, we spoke about Mark Beeson.
Yes.
He was with the agency, and I was too. He had great dogs, and he always wanted somebody to go with him. So I was, willing participant in those hunts. And he was more worried about working his dog because he hunted competitively with his. But he wanted somebody to go along that would help him hunt. Mark rarely carried a gun. He wanted somebody else to carry the gun and do it. So he and I hunted a lot together, say earlier in my career. And then there's been other employees, a Dave Godwin, I think that you met, he's a squirrel dog hunter. But when, I got married and had kids, my wife was saying, well, we need to get a dog. And my thought is, well, I want to do a purpose dog. I don't want just a lap dog. I want a dog that can serve a purpose of a family pet and also hunt. And I always wanted to get a squirrel dog. And so we ended up getting a Feist, which is a small dog.
Yeah. You mentioned something in regards to Mark Beeson, who, longtime, editor here at Mississippi Outdoors Magazine, and Mississippian, born and raised here, and an avid hunter, squirrel dogs, squirrel hunted, that he wanted somebody to go with him. He'd work the dogs. Of course, he's focused on that. But squirrel hunting, it's a social type of, it's a little bit like, what would we compare it to? Maybe like dove hunting or something, where it's a very social sport.
It is, and I think that's what attracts me to it. I look back over my hunting history, what I've done in my lifetime, and I gravitate more to the social sports. I've done it all. Like waterfowl hunting, I was an avid waterfowl hunter, and what I liked a lot about it was the social, aspect of it. I got into rabbit hunting at one time. And once again, it's dog related, but it's a social sport. And squirrel hunting is the same way. When most of my hunts is going to be, I can count on my family to go with me. We invite other people, but it's generally a mixed age group from some of the youngest, to the older, people.
Yeah. The squirrel population in Mississippi, which, again, you're the expert, I'm not. I would think it's all, how in the world could we estimate, the squirrel population, because they're everywhere. And when you see one, there's, it seems like there's 100 you don't see. But in terms of managing it or keeping track of it, even from an agency standpoint, what was that like those years working on that?
You're exactly right. It's hard to, I don't know that you can manage the squirrel population. We do have bag limits. You can manage the habitat, but they are cyclic.
Yeah.
They're going to follow the food. If you have an abundant food year, which is acorns, then their population will generally respond about a year later. And so if you have a couple of years of poor mass crops, then you'll have low squirrel numbers. And even within an area, for sure within the state, you can have some portion of the state have a good mass crop, some other areas that don't, and even within I'm going to say like one of our wildlife management areas, sometimes you can have a portion of it have a good mass crop and the rest of it not. And you can count on finding squirrels where the food is. And, in talking about that, we think about acorns being a primary food source. It is during the winter months, but squirrels eat a lot of different things too to sustain them outside of when acorns are available, or even during those lean mast years.
Okay, and so some of those other food sources, I know we have some people listening. I think of it too. Every now and then I'll see a pine cone. I know that squirrel's been chewing on that.
Yes.
As far as other food sources, primarily what?
You mentioned the pine cones would be the nuts in those. You'll find they'll eat on. It can be fungi like mushrooms, some that's growing on the side of the tree and on the ground. Buds during the spring, when a hardwood starts budding out, they'll eat those buds. Are highly nutritious, oftentimes high in sugar, and they'll seek those out. And if you think about areas that are flood prone, Mississippi Delta or the Pascagoula River system that can go underwater for months on time, those squirrels have to make their living in the treetops during that time of the year, and that's what they'll be feeding on is those buds.
Yeah, they are really prolific.
Yes,
for sure, no doubt about it. The season. So October 1st to basically the end of February, that stretch, cooler months in the fall, it starts cooling off, and it sort of is conducive for the hunter too, because the leaves come off the trees, and now I can see them up there a little better. Why that time of year though? From a biologist standpoint, why October to February?
That's a good question. And a lot of it's going to be outside of the reproductive season, but it will still overlap that February time period. Okay. You'll still have some reproduction going on during that time period, and you'll hear some hunters say that they wish we stopped it early, and because you could harvest some female squirrels that were bred during that time. But as we get back to managing that population, the harvest of squirrels in the state is relatively low. We keep data on that through the harvest surveys, or the agency does now. And so they can kind of track if it's up or down. But over a period of time, fewer people small game hunt, squirrel hunt than they did 40 years ago. Deer hunting, turkey hunting, is a popular sports now.
Yeah.
We've had conversations here in this building about there were 30 years ago, if you were in small town Mississippi at 5 o'clock in the morning, just randomly, and you saw a lot of traffic happening, buzzing through town, you knew it was probably either squirrel season, deer season, and something going on. But opening day of squirrel season now is almost a non-event compared to what it used to be.
Yeah.
There's so much more going on. College football, the popularity of that. And youth sports. There's a lot of things people can do now. But it's unfortunate because it's a great way to introduce young hunters and new hunters to the sport of hunting. Because once again, it's easy in, doesn't take a lot of fancy camouflage, high-tech equipment, and squirrels are abundant.
Sure. Okay, so you mentioned, the easy end doesn't require a lot of camouflage. As it overlaps with deer season, that's something that, especially someone who may think, okay, I have not been a squirrel hunter, I'm going to do it. That's something to consider, where you are, isn't it, as far as making sure you're marked and you can be seen and you're not walking in on top of somebody.
That's right. There's for sure safety. And, we was talking about Mark Beeson earlier, and one of the things I learned from him, one of his rules of safety when he was hunting was you don't load the gun. You don't put one in the chamber until you get to the tree. And that's good, because why keep a loaded gun as you're walking through the woods and somebody trip and fall? And so, but that bled on into, well, let's wear some orange in the woods. It's not going to make or break the squirrel hunt if you're wearing some orange. Right. And that's safety from other hunters in the woods, but also among the people in the hunting party as you spread around the tree. That we want to keep it safe. And you think about deer hunters, there's a lot of overlap. There's 1 month of the hunting season between deer and squirrel that there's no overlap, and that's February. And so but you still want to wear orange inside and outside of deer season. We like to. But you do need to be mindful of where the deer hunters are. If you're on a hunting club, maybe stay away from them. They'll want you to sometimes, or don't want their areas disturbed, but safety reasons as well.
Sure. Private lands versus public lands, too, for squirrel hunting in Mississippi. How does that shake out, and where is most of the squirrel hunting being done, you think?
You're going to concentrate on hardwoods for squirrels, and that's going to be on public or private. Our public lands in Mississippi is very important for squirrel hunters because you've got more hunting opportunity on public land. You've got the same number of days between private and public, but people tie down their private land with deer hunting. They'll open it up in the month of February, but most of the time, as long as deer season's in place, they don't want squirrel hunters on their land because they're concerned about the disturbance of deer. So the public lands in Mississippi are very important to Mississippi squirrel hunters, squirrel dog hunters, and that's what I'm thinking of primarily when we're talking about. But because our wildlife management areas and national forests and federal refuges, most of them are going to be open to squirrel hunting. They may have some difference in dates, but I hunt a lot of public land. In the month of February, I'll start hunting some private land. So our public lands in Mississippi are very important to people because you get an opportunity to go.
Sure. What would be your advice to a hunter who might have a reservation thinking, okay, public lands is available to me, but I don't know who's there. I'm not as familiar with it as somebody I could surprise somebody. What would be your advice to that hunter?
And when I worked here, I'd get that question. I was in our WMA system, so I'd take calls on that, and I think that's a good question. Appreciate the opportunity to answer it. Is one, don't let it intimidate you. It can be, but for me, when I go onto the public land, I've got as much right to be there as anybody else. And for me, squirrel hunting, I don't feel the need to be in there before daylight. I'll generally wait till a little bit after daylight to go in. The deer hunters will normally be at their spot. I'll have my mind, I've got a mental checklist of where I want my priority place. Then my second, if I go to my first spot, and I see a deer hunter, or what I think is a deer hunter vehicle in there, a lot of times I just go to my second spot or third spot. Or if it's on a road and their vehicle is parked on the left side of the road, I'm assuming they're hunting the left side of the road. And if I'm wanting to hunt on the right, then that's the side I'll go in on. So, I'll think about it that way. And occasionally I have bumped into deer hunters, very few times. And it's interesting, I've had them come seek me out. One of those hunts with, the old Mark Beeson we're talking about, we were hunting one day and the dog treed and we could hear somebody whistling, and that's maybe a deer hunter. We've encroached on him and we stopped and, the guy was walking to us at a fast pace. We thought, he's going to scold us. He's going to get on to us pretty good. And he got over there and he said, "No," he said, "Guys, it sounded like y'all was having so much fun. I want to come see what it was like, And so, he shimmied down his tree, to come over and see what all the excitement was about. And, he was interested. So for me, those interactions have been positive. I'm sure there's been some negative for ones, but, it is public land. Mm-hmm. So we can all be out there and it's there for us to share. But another part is the rules and regulations. People open up that brochure and it's overwhelming. All the black print on there, it's multiple fold. And I tell the people when they would call, I said, it's common sense, but not everybody has common sense. So we have to put it in black and white. I said, it'll be in there, don't block the gate. So we have to put that in there.
Sure.
Don't litter. So we got to put that in there. Yeah. Don't drive a nail or a spike in a tree. So we got to put that in there. So it looks overwhelming, but it's common sense items most of the time. So when you read through it, you'll think, oh yeah, check.
Yeah. All right. What about eating squirrels? For those that have, now the way I would describe it, you hear a lot of different things about different types of meat. They even say it tastes like chicken. For me, I've had fried squirrel that it tastes like chicken, and it was really good. Mm-hmm. It's cooked right. What's your experience, and maybe what's your favorite way?
I enjoy fried squirrel, and you can tell the difference between a young squirrel and an older squirrel. The younger squirrel is going to be more tender as they get older, or 2 years and old. And squirrels are young lived. That's part to the biology. They're pretty low on the food chain, so there's a lot of things that's wanting to eat them. But as they do get older, they get tougher. My brother-in-law, that is my regular hunting partner, he has started smoking squirrel, and he's got a recipe, and he says it's all that. It's really good, and it's tender. I don't think it takes that long. When you think about smoking, you think of low temperature for a long length of time, but a small squirrel with a small body mass, it doesn't take as long. Mm-hmm. But he said it does have good flavor, but the biggest item for him is it's tender. Mm-hmm. So, but
you mentioned sort of that historical view of back in the day, open the day of squirrel season, here goes everybody, you could see it, the traffic on the road. Mm-hmm. And everything. So small game hunting, there's not as many people doing it as there used to?
It's not. It's been, as the deer population has grown, and I think even as quality deer management has come along, and people are wanting to grow a bigger buck, they get possessive, and that's a bigger trophy to them. So they don't go after small game as much as they do. And one of the draws to me about the squirrel hunting is I've never had anybody say, "That was my squirrel you killed." With what goes on in the deer woods. Sure. If I don't have to worry about people putting a trail camera out for squirrels. Yeah. And you got your protected area. Yeah. So it's
until squirrels start growing antlers, you're gonna be okay.
That's right.
In that regard.
Yeah.
That's funny. The population, you talked about the population too, small game. Other than humans in that hunting season, what are the primary predators of squirrels in Mississippi?
Hawks can be a big one. Mm-hmm. It could even probably be a snake, young. Snakes, especially like a gray rat snake, are prolific nest robbers of birds. They'll eat the eggs. But just owls. There's a lot of the avian predators in general will, and fox, coyote, bobcats. Yeah. Just they're at the bottom of the food chain.
Yeah. I think about my neighborhood I live in North Mississippi, and it's, it's residential neighborhood. It's next to the Natchez Trace. And I can think in the 10 years or so that I've lived in that location, there's been a couple of times when a number of hawks just started showing up. You saw more hawks. you'd see an owl, fox, sure enough, see a bobcat, during that period of time. And when those things showed up, we saw less squirrels.
Yeah.
Across the board, we saw less squirrels in the neighborhood.
They will. And I know that's been documented, particularly in quail population. As hawks migrate south, quail numbers decrease because they're feeding on quail. And the same will be true with squirrels. And, a lot of times when people think about squirrel hunting, they think, what's the challenge in that? You see city squirrels are everywhere. And you've ever heard a comment, don't be a squirrel?
Yeah.
We're making a decision in the road and don't get run over.
Right.
People think, but they are heavily hunted by other wildlife, these other predators, and they can be really hard to find in a tree. You wouldn't think about it, but their color, they know where every hollow tree is, and that's their aim to get there for cover. You can be in the largest bottom hardwood bottom, and they're going to know where the tallest one pine tree is because they're going to get to that pine tree and go up to the top, and you can't see them. They can blend in. When you're hunting by yourself, it's really tough because squirrel likes to get on the backside.
Right.
As you walk around, he's keeping the tree between you.
Yeah.
So, the more eyes you can have out there with you hunting at a time, the better your odds are for seeing the squirrel.
Sure. So why do you enjoy it?
It's multiple reasons. I do like the social aspect of it. I've been around I'm gonna say the deer hunting scene where people are possessive. That's my deer. Friendships have been lost over a deer, and I don't care nothing about that. I want to go and have a good time. I enjoy being in the woods with people that I like and spend time with. You can have a poor hunt, but still have a good outing. Great conversation out there, and we take a lot of youth. We enjoy that. Kids can be kids in the woods, and we've seen them gravitate to this because they're not being confined in a deer stand. They're not being pulled the reins back on, or that deer's not big enough. Or you can only shoot does. They got so many restrictions on them. Why would they want to pursue, deer hunting a lot of times? You take them out there squirrel hunting, and like for most everybody, small game was the gateway to larger game.
Sure.
Let's get them hooked on small game where there's action out there. You learn woodmanship skills, safety out there, and then I think they're going to enter into the sport of hunting and be there a long time.
Sure.
I got a question, Scott, and this might not be an appropriate question because we're so far into the podcast right now, so people that are avid hunters that have stuck around probably already know this, but how many different species of squirrels do we have in Mississippi, and what are the differences between them? And I'm bringing that up because I remember when I first started working here, there's a big taxidermied black squirrel out in the hallway, and I remember seeing that thing, and when I first started working here, I was like, I've never seen a squirrel like that because I guess I just don't visit that part of the state that often.
Yeah.
And can you kind of talk us through that?
Yeah, most definitely. We're going to have two different squirrel species in the state. You're going to have the gray squirrel and a fox squirrel. You could be three, depending on how you break them out. But in the Delta, you've got a fox squirrel that is different than the hill fox squirrel. You could potentially see a fox squirrel here where we are outside of the Delta, and it's a different species of what you would see in the Delta. In the Delta, you're normally going to have two phases of fox squirrel, a red phase and a black phase. The one here in the hill region of the state is going to be more the red phase, but you could see a white nose tip on them, or sometimes you'll see a little bit of white on the tail. The fox squirrel in the hill region of the state is very low in numbers. At one time, their population was more abundant than what they are now. It could very well be a change in habitat type. If you see them now, a lot of times they're going to be around a pasture, a field that has a grown-up fence row in them. And you will see them in the woods, but they do like to be around fields. And, one time we had a lot more fields in Mississippi, and they CRP, the Conservation Reserve Program, they've gone back in the trees, a lot of them in the 80s. And so I wonder if that loss of old fence row habitat around those fields hasn't, hurt the fox squirrel numbers in the hills.
Because they're bigger too. I mean, there's that fox squirrel part of it. They're just much bigger than the gray squirrel.
Yeah, most definitely. Easily two times heavier weight wise.
So much easier to see in a tree.
Yes, they sure are. And when you're hunting in the Delta and you see a fox squirrel does stand out oftentimes. It's not guaranteed, but because they are bigger, a lot of times that black on the side of a gray oak tree will stand out.
Yeah. What about flying squirrels?
I forgot about that one. That is one, yeah.
And the reason I ask that, okay, is because every time we get in the squirrel conversation, eventually I'll think of a story that my dad told me. He introduced me to hunting by taking me squirrel hunting as a kid over in Alabama. But when he was a little guy, so you're talking about, late 50s, early 60s, he shot a flying squirrel.
Yeah.
And picked it up before it had gone on to be with the Lord. And it curled up and bit through one of his fingers, and he never forgot it. And him telling me that story, I never forgot it as well.
Yeah, yeah. That's it, because our squirrel dogs will tree flying squirrels. You know how small they are, teeny tiny.
Right.
And sometimes you'll get them to move, and you'll see the squirrel. Have seen them just bail out, and how they coast to another tree. But yeah, that is another squirrel species, and our dog don't know the difference.
Right, sure.
The squirrel dog is just a squirrel.
What about, I keep throwing things at you because you seem to have the answers. Those little bitty chipmunks that I see, like my in-laws live in Vicksburg, and they have those little chipmunks. They have the stripes on their back like the ones we see on the cartoons. And where I live, I've never seen one in Northeast Mississippi. I've never looked at it, but they're all over the place in a place like Vicksburg.
Yeah, there are pockets of them, and where I've seen them most regular common is the Lurcell Hills, where you're talking about Vicksburg, down through Claiborne County and Adams, and that Lurcell Bluff will actually run all the way up toward Memphis. And so I haven't been up that area of the state looking for them, but Warren County, Claiborne County, along that bluff line, they're very common, and I've heard of them in other areas of the state, but they are not widely distributed. They're not everywhere.
Is there a reason for that?
There is, other than the good Lord made it happen. That's all all that I know.
Yeah. Okay, so hunting with dogs, social. You're on your feet.
Yeah.
You kind of follow them. What about squirrel hunting without dogs? Is there a stealth aspect? Is it a sit and wait and listen? Kind of how do you describe the differences in those techniques?
And you just touched on what I'd call the two most popular when it comes to still hunting is one actually just sitting in a spot.
Yeah.
And it may be at a food source. You hear people talking about like a hickory tree or maybe an acorn tree, an oak that's got acorns and squirrels coming to it and hunting that way. Or stalk hunting, slipping, and it's just personal preference. And the conditions may dictate if it's really dry and the leaves are noisy and crackly, we may want to stay still longer. But if it's got a heavy dew or after a light rain and it's quiet, it may be a good time.
Yeah. In that scenario, is a squirrel more likely to identify a hunter by hearing them or seeing them, you reckon?
I think it could be either one.
Okay.
For sure, if you're being noisy,
Yeah.
I think that's going to get their attention first.
Yeah.
But, if there is movement, that will as well. Squirrels sometimes will give themselves away with barking, and normally when they bark, their tail moves too. So you may be hearing for the sound, and the tail, it may give him away.
Yeah.
And when you're stalking him, you're normally going to keep a tree or, some type of obstruction between you and him so you can get up, closer. And Matt, you asked me about the draw to squirrel hunting, and one of them is I don't have to give a lot of time to a hunt. If I only have time for an hour and a half, I can go get on an hour and a half hunt. I don't have to commit a lot of time in a day. When you go deer hunting, it's generally 3 or 4 hours, a half day. And so, I like that. And I think other people do. It's kind of easy. Get in and get out. Yeah. If I only got a couple of hours after work before the sun, goes down, I can get that in.
Sure.
And there's a lot of opportunity in Mississippi. I know y'all have spoke about public lands before. I can be hunting within 30 minutes of my house on public land, and a lot of people can. Within an hour, I've got a lot of land, public land, open to me. If I could reach out as far as an hour and a half, I've got a lot more land. And most anywhere in the state within an hour drive, you can be hunting on public land. So, that's another reason, I like a lot of opportunity there for me.
Well, and it's another reason why our state, the state of Mississippi, we hear hidden gem all the time. It's overused, but in regards to what this state offers hunters, whether it's deer hunters or whether it's small game hunters, squirrel hunting, this state is really special. You can't say that about other places.
It's not. And I know you brought up earlier about a hunter that's never hunted public land and, how do they approach it. There is some public land in the state of Mississippi that gets heavily utilized, but most of where I hunt, just coincidentally, there's not a lot of hunting, on it. I can always find somewhere to go, and normally it's in my first priority area. And while I'm out there squirrel hunting, I see a lot of deer sign. I had that thought that, if I was deer hunting, this is where I'd come, deer hunt. And just a lot of people shy away from it, unfortunately, but it's good for those that do take advantage of it.
Sure. And as we've talked about squirrel hunting, I mentioned that, as a kid, my dad took me, and there's something about the fall. It finally cools off a little bit, kind of like it has right now. Finally cools off a little bit. You start to see the leaves turn just a little bit. So the air feels different. It sounds different, smells different, looks different. You're out there in the woods this time of year, whether you're with dogs or not, that whole experience. For anyone, I would say, and I wonder what you would say to this, for anyone who's ever turned their nose up at small game hunting, all it takes is you're out there at that golden hour, that sun's about to go down. It's almost a spiritual experience being in the outdoors this time of year. And that's been my experience squirrel hunting also.
Yeah, most definitely. And unfortunately, there's a lot of hunters today that never have experienced small game. And, and I would tell them, give it a try, and I'd love to take you. It's a great opportunity. One, whether you're out there by yourself still hunting and you see the sun come up or the sun go down, or in a group of friends that you just enjoy being around, and the conversation is out of the world.
Sure. No doubt. Scott, real pleasure to meet you and talk to you about squirrel hunting on the show. Thanks.
Great. Enjoyed it.
Enjoyed it as well. He's Scott Baker, longtime biologist here at Mississippi Department of Wildlife, Fisheries, and Parks. We thank you for listening. We'll see you outdoors.